Greetings, citizens of education. I am your faithful announcer. Let me report on the progress of the Cold War game, a game where actual battles aren't really fought between the two teams, except for a lot of tension and struggle. Let me introduce our two teams. Team United States,
USA, USA,
we rule.
USA,
and Team Soviet Union,
USSR, USSR,
Hooray for
USSR.
communism! The goal is to be the most powerful country in the world by building militaries and weapons as large and powerful as possible. Each team wants a large territory that cannot be invaded and great wealthy economies. So come and sit down because the game is just starting. In the 1940s, aka Quarter 1, Team USA gives $2 billion to Jiang Zeshi, leader of the Chinese nationalists, to help him beat Mao, the Communist Party leader of China. In 1945, Team USA builds nuclear and H-bombs. That's 1 point for USA. Team Soviet Union wants to control raw materials in Eastern Europe, so they install communist dictatorships there. Then they form a blockade around Germany to keep away US and Western influence, but it doesn't last. However, in 1949, Mao's Communist Party gets control of China. Then the Soviets get a nuclear bomb. Whoa, the score is tied at the end of this quarter. In Quarter 2, the 1950s, the race for better weapons continues. The USA gets a hydrogen bomb in 1952. But then, in 1953, the USSR gets a hydrogen bomb as well. They're tied again, and the weapons race still continues. In 1957, the USSR sends an unmanned satellite into space named Sputnik. Then they launch a dog into space a year later. Ooh, double points for the USSR. Now the US is 2 points behind. In 1958, the US finally sends a satellite into space. Then they send a monkey into space in 1959. Final score for this quarter is 5-5. In Quarter 3, from the 1960s to 70s, the USSR sends the first human into space in 1961. Nikita Khrushchev, the dominant Soviet leader after Stalin died, makes an arrangement with Fidel Castro, a young lawyer who led the Cuban Revolution. Khrushchev builds missile sites in Cuba. US is behind again. Late 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis occurs. John F. Kennedy, President of the United States at this time, demands the missiles to be removed, otherwise the US will invade Cuba. So Khrushchev agrees. Ho Chi Minh makes all of Vietnam communist. Then the US reacts by going to war. The US ends up very embarrassed by the war and by the loss of many lives. In 1963, President Kennedy was shot, and he was killed. President Nixon comes up with a plan to reduce the Cold War, and the USSR agrees. Nixon visits China and the Soviet Union in 1972. In the Soviet Union, they signed the SALT I Treaty, making an agreement to limit the amount of weapons. In 1979, the Soviets invade Afghanistan and want to make a communist like them. At the end of the third quarter, the score is 8-11, and the USSR takes the lead. Finally, in Quarter 4 from the 1980s to 90s, President Reagan decides to increase the American military. Next, he protects against enemy missiles by creating Strategic Defense Initiative. In 1987, President Reagan signs the INF Treaty, which bans some missiles. He also puts economic pressure on the Soviets when spending more money on defense. In this quarter, Gorbachev comes to power. He makes glasnost to allow the exchange of ideas and information, as well as economic reforms with perestroika. One of Gorbachev's policies is democratization. Arms control is important to him because he's running out of money for weapons. That gives the US a point. Tied score. Soon, Yeltsin becomes the first president of the Russian Federation, and it's the collapse of the Communist Party. A giant point for Team USA! Yeah! America! Yeltsin gets replaced by President Vladimir Putin, and in 1980 comes the Iran-Iraq War. During this war, the US gives money to both sides so that whoever wins will be friends with the USA. The USSR occupies Afghanistan, starting another war. They quit when they withdraw in 1989. At the end of the fourth quarter, the score is 16-13, and it looks like the United States has beaten the USSR.
Hooray!
America!
Our final comments on this game are that both teams made many moves. Some of them worked, and some of them didn't. However, even though the game is through, there's still competition between the two teams. And today, they still disagree on some important things. So be aware that these teams may declare a rematch. Alright folks, thank you for watching the Cold War game. We hope you have a good night. I'm your faithful announcer, signing off. Peace.